Welcome to Capitol Preview, a weekly bipartisan discussion with Iowa legislators about the key issues facing our state. Brought to you by MediaCom.
Good morning and welcome to another segment of Capitol Preview. I'm Bill Peard and I'll be your host this morning. Our guest today is Representative Chris Hagenow, representing Windsor Heights. Good morning, Representative Hagenow. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you bet. Chris, I'm going to just start and we'll just have a conversation of some of the things that I think that are important to you, and I'd kind of like you to give us an update on the state budget. That seems to be the big talking points right now for.
Well, putting together the state, thanks. Putting together the state budget is typically the biggest thing that we do every year at the legislature, and we have a budget that this year will probably be in excess of $7 billion, and we have a revenue estimate of the available money that we have to work with, and so we have to then take that money and figure out how that gets sliced with all the different budget areas. We have always, in the House Republican caucus, taken a very hard line that we're not going to spend more than we have in available revenue, that we are committed to a balanced budget. We're not going to shift dollars off of the budget, and so we think that's a responsible thing to do for the taxpayers that give us the money to work with. So for this year, we have, with that in mind, we have about $200 million of new revenue to work with. And so about half of that we've already committed to K-12 funding. And then we have other parts of that that are obligated to meet our previous commitments and federal restrictions that we have to, specifically within healthcare, that we have to pay. So it is a very tight budget year, I guess, is a long way of saying that. And so we have to really get down and dirty with each line item in the budget, figure out what is a priority and what is not, so that we can continue to do the things that Iowans expect of their state government, but do it responsibly.
Sure. And I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Representative Hagenow, but I believe that Iowa is one of the few legislators that have to have a balanced budget. Yeah. Is that correct?
Iowa code requires us to have a balanced budget. We have a 99% expenditure limitation. It's not in the Constitution, which is one thing that I think we would like to do.
Right.
That's met with some resistance because there are a lot of people that would like to just spend as much as possible. And although a lot of these things that are requests of the legislature are very worthwhile programs, things that I support, but we still have to be responsible in staying within that statutory limitation that we have.
Absolutely. Well, Chris, what's the status of educational funding at the Capitol? I know you kind of touched on that a little bit.
Well, that's and like I alluded to, that's one of the big issues right now, and we try and set that early in the session. The House and the Senate haven't come to agreement on that. Very early in the session, the House passed a 1.25% growth in per pupil K through 12 education funding, which we feel represents our best effort within the available revenue. The Senate has passed a 4% growth, which we do not have the money to fund. And while that is attractive to those that want as much money as possible for K-12 education, and on our side, we want to be able to do the very best we can, but we have to be responsible. So we're in conference committee now on trying to work out the differences and where we'll end up on that. The House has said that since 1.25 is really our best effort and the farthest that we can go and still do the other things that Iowans expect us to do, that we need to get serious about cost-saving measures within K-12 education. And so we're asking for some of those cost-saving measures to be incorporated in that bill, and through that continue to do the best for the students in K-12 education, which is really where the emphasis should be anyway.
Yeah, sure. That makes perfect sense. What other educational policies are being discussed up there right now?
Well, we have some things that we'd like to talk about on the House side, and one I talked about was trying to find cost savings within the K-12 educational system. Now, we can continue to pour more money into this system, but we also need to be thinking about, is the current investment, are we getting the most bang for our buck on that? And so what can we do, looking at different programs, looking at the way that negotiations work with the teachers and the contracts that are involved, and I think we should be looking at all of those things. So we're talking about that. We've had some proposals with regard to school choice that are particularly important to me, and making sure that parents have real school choice and being able to send their children to public, private, parochial, homeschool, wherever they choose to send their children. Does the state make that possible? And so maybe setting up some tax credit programs or something so that parents can really be able to choose that regardless of cost.
Sure. And I also know that you're the lead sponsor of HJR 8, which, why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's one that came to me that I started looking at last year. And what it does is under Article 5 of the United States Constitution, there is a mechanism to call for a convention of states to propose amendments to the United States Constitution. Typically, or actually every time in our nation's history that there's been an amendment to the United States Constitution, it's been done by Congress proposing that, and 3/4 of the states ratify. What this does is the other mechanism under our Constitution where the states can call for this convention of states. If 2/3 of the states agree, then it goes back to the states for ratification again by 3/4. And I heard over and over in my last campaign, and I think we all have heard this and feel this, a real deep frustration with what's going on in Washington, D.C. They either lack the political will or the desire to make changes to get our fiscal house in order and feel like Washington, D.C. is broken. So what we're trying to do is, as our framers intended, is to have states exert their control over the federal government and look for new ways to restrain the power and the size of the federal government, which I think is a bipartisan issue. And so we're looking at that and making it. It's passed in several other states, and this is Iowa's application to be part of that process. There's no specific amendment behind that we're talking about, but it's time to make some changes in what's going on in Washington, D.C.
Absolutely. I think that's great because I think in a lot of cases the states have their house in order, and so maybe it's time to
I think
the trend a little bit.
And you see in public opinion polls where people are fairly satisfied with the direction of things in Iowa. They're satisfied with their state government, but yet the complete opposite is true with their leadership in what's going on in Washington, D.C. So let's take some of those Iowa ideas and apply them with what's going on at the federal level.
And remind them
yes,
where
exactly.
where the control comes from.
Yeah.
I know you've been dealing with the legislation at the Capitol, dealing with ride-sharing companies like Uber, and I think that's kind of an interesting.
It is. You know, we've come to see just in the year that Uber has been in Iowa, just how popular the service has become, and people that travel to other parts of the country and use it. And so we sense that there's a real interest in making sure that Uber stays here and other ride-sharing companies, and they can operate. But the flip side is a concern that local jurisdictions and cities might pass regulations on that are so onerous that it's a disincentive to operate. And we don't want that. We want that here. And so we're trying to come up with a uniform statewide set of laws around ride-sharing companies to make sure that they can operate, while at the same time making sure that they continue to operate safely. And the biggest sticking point, I think, now is insurance coverages throughout to make sure that there's that full spectrum of coverage for drivers and passengers and everybody else, so that you head on the road or jump in an Uber car, you know that you're going to be protected. And so we'll work that out. I'm very hopeful. There's a lot of interest in working on it.
You know, I think that's you're way ahead of the curve on that as these rideshare companies become more and more, prevalent in our state. So excellent. The House recently passed a bill with several changes to the Iowa firearms law. Do you want to kind of go through that a little bit?
Briefly, anytime we touch firearms laws, it's a hot button issue. These are very modest changes supported by Iowa's law enforcement community. So we feel that they're a positive for public safety, and with permit renewals, allowing parents the right to teach their children about firearms. Some of those pieces, which really are, I think, they're just common sense items to clean up the language. So I look forward to it passing quickly.
Very good.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Representative Hagenow. You've been excellent today, and appreciate all your hard work. Thank you for joining us with Representative Chris Hagenow. Stay tuned for our next segment with Representative Chip Baltimore.